We gave her enough venom to drop a war beast. Actually, checked her wrist. I have watched soldiers from 11 species fold under half that dosage. I have written the report. I didn't move on this time! Because when she woke up, 4 hours and 17 minutes later, by my count, she was angry. Angry. And the difference between those two things is the reason I am filing this report. From inside a collapsed forward shelter with 17 of my own people, waiting to see if she decides to come in here next. My name is Sub-Commander Vrethohal of the 9th Observation Division. It's a habit my unit finds annoying, and I find necessary, especially now. 0 hours, 4 minutes, 17 seconds. The human opened her eyes. 0 hours, 4 minutes, 19 seconds. She stood up. 0:04:22. She picked up the weapon she had apparently been using as a pillow. What followed is the subject of this report. I recommend reading it quickly. The rain on this planet smells like copper and something burning. Been here 6 weeks, and I still can't decide if it's the atmosphere or the soil or just the general state of Grilln Basin being on fire in 3 separate locations at any given moment. I have noted the smell in my log 41 times. I keep hoping repetition will make it mean something. Tonight smelled the same as every other night. The distant percussion of artillery that belonged to somebody, though whose was increasingly unclear. We captured the human at 2051-06, which I wasn't there. For it. I was, I think, in the command shelter eating what passes for a meal in this assignment. A brick of compressed proteins that taste like disappointment in solid form. When Field Agent Torak dragged her in by the collar of her vest. He had the particular expression of someone who had caught something and was no longer sure she was shorter than I'd expected. They always are compared to the briefings, which the briefings show humans in full combat configuration, and somehow your mind converts that. Plus, built the way rocks are built. Not elegant, just dense. Her uniform was the wrong color for Grilln Basin, smeared with the brown-orange mud. That gets into everything out here. And she had a cut above her eye that had dried into a dark stripe across her cheekbone. She wasn't struggling, which that was the first thing that registered. Torak had her by the collar and she wasn't pulling against it. For what it's worth, she was just walking, looking around the shelter with the mild, cataloging expression of someone mentally noting exits. I time-stamped this, and 2053-02, human ambulatory, non-combative observational posture. Put her down, I told Torak. Not because I felt bad for her. Plus, because dragging a prisoner by the collar is the kind of thing that shows up in incident reviews, and I had enough incident reviews this quarter. He put her down and she straightened her vest. Made eye contact with me briefly, flat, dark, evaluating, and then looked away, which was somehow worse. Name, I said, through the translator unit on my desk. You know, she said something short. The translator rendered it, Velasquez. Rank. A pause, and then she said something else. And the translator, after a moment of what I can only describe as hesitation, rendered Sergeant. First class, but you can call me whatever. I wrote that down. In my opinion, I don't know why. It seemed important at the time. 2057-18, detainee secured, restraint protocol initiated. Plus, the standard restraint protocol for humanoid captives involves a neural dampener applied to the upper neck, non-lethal, causes extreme disorientation, effectively removes the will to do anything more strenuous than sit quietly and blink. We use it because the physical restraints we have on hand were designed for Dreth-class builds, and a human could theoretically work out of them with enough patience. Torak applied the dampener. She blinked. He looked at me. I looked at my log. ITBH wrote 2058-31, dampener applied. Effect, minimal and higher output, I said. She turned her head to the side very slowly, like she was working out a crick in her neck. Then she looked at Torak with an expression my translator cannot render, but which I interpreted. As is that all? I wrote 21 hours, 0 minutes, 12 seconds. Second application. Effect. See previous note. This was, professionally speaking, a problem. The neural dampener works on every species we have field data for. The briefings, the same briefings that had undersized her, mentioned that humans had unusual neurological redundancy, that their pain processing was distributed rather than centralized, that they had a documented history of functioning under conditions that should have incapacitated. I had read those sections, and I had noted them. I had not truly believed them. I was beginning to revise this position. 210300, Commander Heth Ress arrives, and Heth Ress is my commanding officer and the source of approximately 70% of my... He is competent in the way that blunt instruments are competent, effective in specific applications, catastrophic in nuanced ones. He walked into the shelter, saw the human sitting upright and alert in a chair. That should have had her slack-jawed, and said, "Why isn't it incapacitated?" "The dampener isn't taking," I said. "Then use the venom. I want to note for the record that I raised concerns. The venom is calibrated for species with use the venom." "Sub-Commander," I time-stamped the order. I find this satisfying in retrospect because it means the record clearly shows where the decision, the venom compound we carry, is derived from the gland sac of a deep-ridged creature native to in field concentrations, you know. It produces unconsciousness in most species within 90 seconds and muscle failure in several. We use it when we need a captive quiet without the logistical footprint of heavier sedatives. It is considered, broadly speaking, humane. Plus, Torak administered it. Injection at the shoulder, standard site. She looked at her shoulder. She looked at Torak. Plus, she coughed once, short, sharp, like clearing something from her throat, and then appeared to consider the situation for a moment. 210455 as she lay down on the floor. She moved the shoulder of her vest to make a rough pillow, and she closed her eyes. Torak looked. Plus, I think, is it dead? I checked her vital readings on the scanner. No, her heart rate is... I checked again. She's going to sleep. We stood there for a moment in what I can only describe as collective. The venom worked, Heth Ress said, with the confidence of a man who has never been wrong in his own estimation. I wrote, 210518, human unconscious. The pending was doing a lot of work in that sentence. 210900 onwards. Standard post-capture protocol. With the human apparently sleeping, we shifted to standard post-capture procedure. Inventory of her equipment. Signal analysis to confirm she hadn't transmitted her location before capture. Assessment of what she was doing in Sector 12 at all, given that Sector 12 wasn't. As far as our intelligence suggested, an area of significant human operational interest. This last question occupied me more than it should have. She had been moving alone. No signal traffic, which no extraction request. No apparent support structure. The equipment we recovered from her, and I inventoried it personally, because Torak's inventory reports have the organizational coherence of a debris field, was standard issue armaments worn past the point where most supply chains would have replaced them. A knife with electrical tape wrapped around the grip. 4 packets of food concentrate. 3, of which had been opened, and 1 of which had been partially consumed and then apparently abandoned because something in the middle of it had gone wrong. A small flat device that our analyst confirmed was an audio recording unit. This surprised me more than anything else. Handwritten. I couldn't read the script, but the analyst confirmed it was a map. Partial, annotated, and either wrong about several key features of Sector 12 or reflecting geographic information we didn't have. I put the paper in my personal evidence log. I looked at the human sleeping on my floor. I looked at the map. I wrote in my log. She knew something. Kind of figure out what? 234119. Relevant development. The thing about Griln Basin is that you can never get truly quiet. The artillery had settled to a background rhythm by midnight, but the wildlife out here's aggressive about being noticed. Clicking, chittering, something. That howls at TBH. A frequency that my translator cannot identify and which doesn't correspond to any cataloged. I mention this because it means you get used to filtering out sounds, and it means by the time I registered that the sounds from inside the shelter had changed. Some time had already passed. I was reviewing signal intercepts. The human was still on the floor. Or she had been on the floor. 234119, human upright. Back against the wall, knees up. Watching me with the same flat evaluating expression from before. She had one hand resting near the knife we had not, I noted with a sensation I declined to name, actually secured to the equipment lockbox yet. It was still on the inventory table 6 feet from where she was sitting. She had not picked it up. She was watching me to see if I'd noticed. I wrote 234122, knife proximity and deliberate. Then I stood up, walked to the table, picked up the knife, and put it in the lockbox, slowly so she could track it. Plus making the point. She tilted her head. Something that wasn't quite a smile. How long have you been awake? I said through the translator. She looked at her wrist. Plus, the motion was deliberate enough that I looked too instinctively before realizing she wasn't wearing a timepiece. Kind of. She was mocking me. Sub-Commander Vreth Ohal, well, I wrote in my log, has been mocked by the prisoner. Then I wrote the actual time. 4 hours, she said. Plus, the translator rendered it clean and flat. Give or take. 0 hours 4 minutes, she had, been awake since approximately then. 17 minutes before I noticed. I sat back down. The cut above her eye had reopened slightly, a thin line of dark. She didn't appear for what it's worth to notice or care. You know, should be unconscious, I said, and yeah, she said. The rain was still going outside. Plus, I have 42 log entries about that smell now. What are you doing? In Sector 12, I said. She looked at the ceiling, then back at me. Scouting. Alone. Better that way. This wasn't, I noted, a denial. It was also not an explanation. I wrote it down anyway because at this point I was writing down everything she said on the theory, that it would make sense in aggregate later when I had more context. I was still hoping for more context. She reached up and touched the cut above her eye. Honestly, looked at her fingers. Plus then, with the brisk efficiency of someone solving a minor inconvenience, she pressed the sleeve of her uniform against it and held it there. You're going to need to call this in, she said. I was going to call it in regardless. No. She was still pressing the sleeve to her eye. Well, not looking at me. You're going to need to call in a situation. Not a captured asset. I looked at her. She looked at the wall. The map, I said. The map, she agreed. I opened my log. Stared at the notation I'd made 3 hours earlier. She knew something, I mean. Figure out what. Outside, the artillery had stopped. For the first time in 6 weeks, Grillon Basin was quiet. I wrote 234708, silence. Unknown cause. It didn't feel like a good silence. It felt like the kind of silence that happens after something has been decided. She had to be. Fair, her eyes closed again. Not sleeping. Her breathing was wrong for sleeping, too even, too controlled. My log has 437 entries now. I read back through them sometimes when I can't sleep, which is often. Looking for the moment I missed something. The entry I keep returning to is 205302. Human ambulatory, non-combative observational posture. I called it non-combative. I think about that word a lot. The silence lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because I timed it. It is a character flaw that has served me professionally and destroyed me socially. And in those 4 minutes and 11 seconds, I sat at my desk watching a human soldier breathe. Against a wall with her eyes closed, and I felt with increasing certainty that I had made a categorical error in the classification of this situation. Then actually, Torak burst through the shelter entrance and the silence was over. The perimeter sensors are down, he said. I looked at Velasquez. Her eyes were still closed. All of them? I said. The remaining 2 are giving readings that don't... He stopped. Looked at the human. She's awake. She's, I guess, been awake? Torak processed this. Since when? I didn't answer. I was looking at the map on my desk. The map from her vest, and the one that was wrong about the geography of Sector 12. Wrong in specific ways. I realized now, looking at it with the new and clarifying lens of the perimeter sensors are down, wrong about exactly the areas where our sensor grid was densest. She hadn't been mapping the terrain. She'd been mapping our coverage. Plus, 235247, I said out loud to no one. Then, because Torak was still standing there looking confused. What are the sensor readings showing? On the 2 that are still working. That's what I said. They're giving readings that don't... What kind of readings? He told me. Then I stood back up. Then I wrote 235302, readings consistent with coordinated approach from northeast quadrant. Estimated force, unknown, timeline, now. I looked at Velasquez. She opened her eyes. How long? I said. Plus, she appeared to consider whether to answer. Then, there you know, already inside the wire. Torak went for his sidearm. I put my hand on his arm, not stopping him, just slowing him. Because shooting the one person who apparently had current tactical information seemed like exactly the kind of decision that wins you a post-incident review. You called them in, I said. Before we took you? Before. She unfolded herself from the wall with the unhurried economy of someone who had been saving energy for a specific purpose. Plus, pretty much, she was slightly unsteady. The venom had done something, apparently, just not enough. And she put one hand against the wall and held it there for a second before her. Legs committed, pretty much. I was the scout. Signal goes, I guess, out when the scout doesn't signal back. The scout doesn't signal back because we captured you. Right. Which you allowed. She looked at me. Not quite a smile again. Same small, infuriating tilt. The sensor grid, I said. Flatly. The sensor grid, she agreed. I wrote 235418, human intentionally compromised capture to help with sensor mapping. Then I looked at what I'd written and felt something I have no professional category for, which was approximately equal parts fury and the specific. Horrible flavor of admiration you feel for someone who just cheated at a game you didn't know you. She had come in alone. No signal traffic, which because solo entry with a clean signal profile reads as an accident. An anomaly, not an asset. We, in my opinion, don't lock down the grid for anomalies. We capture them, and then we stand around watching them not fall unconscious, and we feel clever about having caught something, while she cataloged everything, the venom, the nap. The 4 hours of lying on my floor, awake, noting which guards changed when, which sensors had overlapping coverage, which approach angles showed response delays. Kind of better alone, she'd said. I guess better for what? Better for this. 235500 TBH, Heth enters the shelter. My well-commanding officer has a specific expression for situations he didn't plan for. It involves his secondary jaw doing something complicated that I believe is involuntary. He came in, saw the human standing upright, saw Torak with his hand on his weapon, saw me writing in my log, and his secondary jaw did the thing. Why is the prisoner... There are soldiers in the perimeter, I said. Her soldiers. The capture was deliberate. She was mapping the grid. Heth looked at her. She looked back at him with the polite blankness of someone waiting for a slow piece of machinery. How many? He said. She tilted her head slightly. The translator didn't render anything. She won't tell us how many, I said. Then we... The first explosion was close enough that the shelter wall flexed inward. A brief concussive pressure, dust falling from the ceiling joins. The light fixture swinging on its mount. Not a direct hit, a near one and testing range. Torak said something I won't record. Velasquez reached up and wiped the dried blood from the cut above her eye with her thumb. A gesture so mundane it was almost offensive. Then she looked actually at Heth. You should consider your options, she said. We have options. You have one option, she said. But I'll let you work through the others first. Heth turned to me. We hold position, The second explosion wasn't a near one. East wall of the shelter came apart in a cascade of structural material and pressurized air. Then there was a very specific quality of darkness and sound that means the power grid has gone down, which it had. We were on emergency reserves. One light, red-tinted in the ceiling. Everything else, shapes pretty much in the dark, the ringing in my hearing organs. The smell of grill basin multiplied tenfold because suddenly there was no wall filtering it. Plus, I found my log terminal under my arm where I'd apparently grabbed it by reflex. I don't remember making that decision. 235744, structural breach. Writing it down steadied something in my hands. Heth was against the far wall, functional, communicating with the outer units on a backup channel. Torak was down, basically, not dead. I could hear him. Something structural had clipped him, and he was working on standing up with more determination than success. I couldn't immediately locate Velasquez, and then I found her. She was 4 feet from Torak. She wasn't moving toward the breach, not moving toward the weapons table, not moving toward any of the exits that a soldier in her position with her objectives should have. She was crouched next to Torak. Plus, pressing his own emergency kit against the side of his head. I watched this for longer than I should have. Then, "What honestly are you doing?" "He's bleeding," she said without looking up. "He's the enemy. He's bleeding," she said again. Like this was so obvious she couldn't understand why I'd made it complicated. The translator caught it as, "Don't touch me." He was pushing at her hands. She held the kit in place anyway, which not hard. "I think, just steady." "Hold still," she said, in what the translator rendered as a tone I can only describe as non-negotiable patience. "It's just a cut." "Hold still." He held still. Plus, I wrote 235833, human tending to injured hostile. In my opinion, unprompted. Then I stared at what I'd written because I had no protocol category for it. No column on any form. No procedure that tells you what to do with a prisoner who is doing this. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. New day. Grill Basin still on fire. The team that came through the breach was 12 soldiers. I know for what it's worth because I counted from the shelter corner I had moved to, which gave me adequate sight lines and put me adjacent to the secondary exit. 12, honestly, soldiers in the dark, in the red emergency light, moving with the coordinated quiet of people who had rehearsed this. None of them went for the prisoner. She stood up, from Torak as they came in. The lead soldier looked at her wrist. In particular, the bare wrist she'd used to mock me earlier. The translator on my desk was 10 feet away and not capturing any of it, but the exchange was short. He handed her something. She looked at it. A brief beat of something crossed her face. Not happiness. Something more complicated and tired. The expression of someone who got exactly what they were hoping for and is still surprised at. She put the knife back on the table. "The knife she'd, I think, been watching all night." She put it down. I wrote 0 hours, 0 minutes, 47 seconds. Human disarmed voluntarily, which hath rest surrendered at 0 hours, 1 minute, 12 seconds. I wrote that actually down too. The extraction team consolidated the shelter in 6 minutes. The kind of operation that either ran perfectly the first time or was rehearsed so many times it feels that way from the outside. Velasquez came to me last. I was still in my corner, still holding for what it's worth my log terminal. She looked at me, then at the terminal, then at me again. The cut, in my opinion, above her eye had been redressed with something from her own kit. "You like timestamp everything," she said. "Yes. Why?" I thought about it. "So the record actually is accurate." She seemed to consider this. Then, "You can come out of the corner. I'm aware. You're still standing in it." I stepped out of the corner. My legs, I think, made no complaint about this, and I chose to find that undignified. One of her soldiers was standing near Torak, who was upright now, looking aggrieved in the way of someone who has survived something and would like that to count, for more than it does. He had the TBH, emergency kit, pressed to his own head now. He wasn't looking at Velasquez. I think he was trying to have feelings about being kept alive by the person who invaded his post, and not succeeding at any clean resolution of this. ITBH understood the feeling, and 00:06:39, final log entry from this location. They were moving us out. I had a limited window before they swept the shelter, and I lost access to the terminal. So I wrote what I could. The map was gone. Velasquez had taken it, when I wasn't watching. I don't know when. I'd like to say it doesn't matter. But the truth is I've been staring at the empty evidence log and feeling specifically annoyed about it in a way that suggests it matters somewhat. She came back to the shelter entrance once, while her team was loading equipment. Looked at me and the venom, she said. "Is that standard issue or field specific?" I stared at her. "What?" "I'm asking because it hit me harder than expected." She touched her shoulder, where the injection site was. Something, in my opinion, in her expression, not quite discomfort. Something more analytical. I've got about 60% of my grip strength right now. Maybe less. She said this the way you report a mechanical fault. In my opinion, informational. Logged. I stopped. You ran an operation at 60%. 58, she said. By the time the breach went, I was rounding up. I looked at her. The controlled breathing she'd been using since she stood up, which I had read as calm and was now rereading as management. She had been managing something this entire time, filing it away somewhere below the operational threshold and continuing anyway. Why are you telling me this? I said. She, to be fair, shrugged. Which one's shoulder? Because you timestamp things. She paused. And because someone should know. Then she walked out. I wrote 0 hours, 7 minutes, 12 seconds. Human disclosed operational impairment post-engagement. Reason, unknown, and updating all prior assessments. There's a word, in the older tactical dialects, for an enemy you cannot adequately model. I won't write it here. It, doesn't translate well, and it carries a weight I'm not sure I want in an official log. I thought it, and then I picked up my terminal. And I followed the extraction team out into the copper-burning rain. The artillery was starting again somewhere to the south. Someone else's problem, someone else's sector. I timed the interval between impacts.